And a very good afternoon to everybody. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes just for those attendees who are still sort of trying to log in. I can see those attendee numbers going up, so if we just give them a few minutes while they get in, that will be great. Can you believe it? It's another Friday afternoon webinar. And today's webinar, it's the big question. I think if I had £1 for every time somebody asked me the question, do I go down the redundancy route or do I return staff to work, I'll probably have a good couple of £100 in my purse to go and spend. So that's the real thing that I'm going to be covering today. Is the big question is redundancy or return to work. So just a quick reminder, it's Angela Clay from HR for UK. Today is Friday, the 19th of June, and as I said, I'm covering my webinar on that big question, redundancy or return to work. So just as a reminder, who are HR for UK? HR for UK is the leading provider of HR services and employment law advice. We also provide payroll, and pension services, and we also have health and safety, which we've talked about in last week's webinar. We've got over 30 years of industry experience, and we've got some fantastic 5-star reviews. And I know I say it every week, but please do go and have a look at our website. See for yourself what other people say about the services they get from us. So, you know, website www.hrforuk.com. Go and have a look and go and see for yourself what others say. So just by way of introduction, myself, I'm Angela Clay. For those of you who don't know, as an employment law and HR, as an employment law solicitor and HR advisor, I am the Managing Director for HR for UK, and I'm responsible for HR for UK's role in making sure that businesses like yours come out of this coronavirus crisis successfully. And the way you'll be able to do that is through getting clear, practical advice from HR for UK. We support businesses throughout the UK, and it doesn't matter what that industry is, we are able to help and support you. So as I've already sort of alluded to, my vision is, and it always has been right from the start of this coronavirus crisis, is to make sure that your business comes out of it successfully. These are very challenging times, and the only way that businesses can come out is by planning. The only way you can plan is by having clear professional help and support to get you through that. So, as I said, the big question today is redundancy or return to work. There are 3 big areas that I'm going to be covering. The importance of planning. I'm going to be going through a whistle-stop tour of some really key important things that you should be doing over the next couple of weeks and months as we sort of start gearing up, coming out of the lockdown. The importance, what options there are for you, for your staff returning back to work, and then the all-important message and process on conducting redundancy processes in a safe and cost-effective way. Do ask questions. In the panel box to the right-hand side, you should have a section where you can ask questions. Please do ask those questions. Those questions are important to us. They're not only important to us, but if you're thinking of a question, you probably find there are maybe 20 other people in this webinar who are thinking about that same question. So please do ask those questions. It doesn't have to be related to today's webinar. It can be any question that you may have in relation to either employment law matters, staffing issues that you may have, or perhaps how I can help you devise a plan, making sure that your business comes out of the coronavirus successfully. So please do pop those questions in, and you know, we're also always looking for suggestions on future webinars. So these webinars are only as good as what they are for you. So I want to make sure that I have that, but I can only do that if you help me. So please do put those questions in there, suggestions. I'm really looking forward to those. If you do think of something after the webinar, you can contact us. You can contact us through our website, which is www.hr4uk.com. You can fill out a contact us form and somebody will be in touch with you. Or you can drop an email, which is info@hr4uk.com. Or you can give us a call, and the telephone number is 01455 444 222. So plenty of ways for you to be able to get in touch. And I really look forward to answering those questions so that I can help your business. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and you will get a recording of this once it has been downloaded through the software. We will be collating all those questions and providing you with those invaluable answers. And as always, we will package that up and send it out to you during the course of the early parts of next week. But you don't need to hurry and rush and take those notes, because you will be able to go back and listen to the webinar time and time again, making those questions, answering those questions that you may have. I can see those questions are coming in. Imogen, thank you very much. I will be coming to those at the end. I am certain that today I'm going to have some time for those all-important Q&As. I know I always put an hour aside, but I'll give you early warning that if we do go over it, I won't be offended if you leave at at 4 o'clock. You've probably got something else to do. But for those of you who can stay on, I would certainly encourage you to do so, because we do like to get to those Q&As at the end. So that's enough about my introductions, and let's get down to the nitty-gritty on what today's webinar is all about. So the big question is redundancy or return to work. So many businesses are sadly in the situation where they are finding that they are going to have to downsize their business to ensure their survival until the economy or the increase in demand starts to come through. Despite the furlough scheme's best efforts to try and protect employment and to support employers with the financial burden of covering wage costs, many businesses are starting to have a look at, well, that's not going to be enough, and they are having to make really, really difficult decisions. And the big decision is, do I even try and get staff to return to work, or do I just bite the bullet and start thinking about redundancies now? And I'm going to cover all of that during today's webinar. So as I said earlier on, there's three parts. I can't get my teeth in today, so I do apologize. There are 3 parts to this webinar of which are going to help you through this. The importance of planning staffing levels, the options that you have with returning staff into work, and of course conducting redundancies in a safe and cost-effective way. So let's have a look at that first area, in the importance of planning staffing levels. So if you're having to make redundancies and you want to try and tie that into the end of the furlough scheme, you need to start thinking about the number of potential redundancies that you are going to make. So this is potential redundancies. These are the proposed numbers. These are the contemplated numbers. They may not be the actual numbers that you end up making at the end, but these are your early thought processes on how many numbers are of roles that are at risk. And this is really important, because at this early stage, you need to be contemplating whether you're going to be making 20 or more employees redundant at one establishment. And the reason why this is so important, because if you do go over that number of 20 proposed or contemplated redundancies at one establishment, this will give rise to additional obligations that you will have to carry out in terms of the redundancy process. And this is the collective consultation. A lot of employees get really nervous about this collective consultation, and it is really important, because if you get it wrong, there are protective awards that get made in relation to that breach. And that protective award is significant, because it's 90 days gross pay for all the affected employees. It doesn't take a lot for anybody to think. If you are thinking, even if it is just 20, if you are looking at 90 days gross pay for 20 employees, that could be significant. So it's really important that when you start thinking about this, you do start thinking about those numbers to make sure that you go down the right route in terms of effecting that redundancy process. I will cover redundancy a little bit more a little bit later, but it's really important that you have that in the forefront of your mind if you are starting to contemplate the redundancies. So throughout June, and I know we are already on the 19th of June, so perhaps I should have given you this warning a couple of webinars ago, but really throughout June, you should start thinking about how you can use the flexible furlough scheme from the 1st of July. Of course, the 1st of July is a big date, is where you can start bringing back employees who have previously been furloughed or who may perhaps still be on furlough back into part-time work. You can't bring them in until the 1st of July, so at the moment you've still got some time to think about it. But you really should be giving it some thought, because the scheme is there to be able to support you to open your business if you haven't already got it open. Many of you may have gone in as business owners and really mucked in and did the work yourself. And it's time to start getting those employees back. So start thinking about who you're going to be bringing back, when you're going to be bringing back, and on what terms you're going to be bringing them back, because that will all have an impact on how the furlough scheme is going to be there to support you. We know that the government contributions in the grants that are provided are going to be scaled back from August, where employers will have to start making some form of contribution. So whilst I'm talking about July, you should actually start be looking at August, because July, yes, you will be getting staff back in, you will be paying staff their wages for the actual hours that they are working, but you will not need to be making any contribution to those furloughed hours. In other words, the hours that employees are not working. But from August, you will need to calculate what your employer's national insurance contribution and the minimum automatic pension contribution is going to be. Now, this might only be a small percentage of contribution that needs to be made, but can you afford it? Is it realistic for you to be able to afford that percentage? Doesn't matter how big or how small it is, it will have an impact on your cash flow. And if you can't afford it, I'm afraid you're going to need to start thinking about having the difficult decision making on starting to think about redundancies. Of course, if you can afford it, you can start gauging how many employees you can start keeping in the business, either on furlough or on the flexible furlough scheme. So again, throughout June, you need to be thinking about whether or not you will need to make organizational structural changes to your business. Now, this is not only staffing arrangements, this is physical changes to your workplace. You might need to be bearing in mind, is your workforce going to be reduced because of a reduction of having to carry out work of a particular kind? Are you going to have to reduce your workforce because of social distancing measures? Or are you going to have to reduce your workforce because of phased start and finish times? You might need to be increasing your workforce to accommodate the increase in demand. So all of these are going to have an impact on your operations, and it's going to have an impact on your staffing levels. So it's really, really important to try and get a handle of what that's going to be like. A lot of questions I've had over the last couple of weeks is, what happens if I simply don't know? We don't have a crystal ball, but you will have a sense of maybe getting 1 or 2 employees back. Test the water for the first week or 2. You might have to be flexible and nimble in the first few weeks as we come out of lockdown, and as we come out of the measures and the lockdown, the compulsory lockdown, as we start coming out of that. The government is easing lockdown every single day as we come along. So again, you might need to just test the water and see how it goes. You might have overestimated, or you may have underestimated, but the beauty of the flexible furlough scheme is that you can change it from week to week. So don't think, oh, I've committed to this. Yes, you have committed it to 1 week, but it's only a week. So again, you can be flexible, you can be nimble, and you can be agile to what your business needs are. But you might, as I say, you may be able to use the flexible furlough scheme as interim support to help you. but you might have to make some more permanent changes. So the flexible furlough scheme is going to be able to help you as you try and ease into after lockdown. But actually, the reality is once that crutch of the flexible furlough scheme goes, you are going to have to make more permanent changes, in which case you might need to be thinking about permanent changes. So those are variation of terms. Again, you need to think about whether you have to consult with that in relation to those variations. How many employees do you have to consult with? And I'm going to come back to that all-important number 20. Number 20 is the all-important number, whether it's with redundancies, variation of terms, because it does then mean that you tip over into collective consultation, even if it is in relation to a variation of terms. Again, when you're looking at these variations, will any of these result in making redundancies? So again, these are questions. I think I'm asking more questions today than what I'm giving you answers, but hopefully by the time we get to the end of it, I would have touched on a couple of nerve points where you're thinking, I remember Angela saying something along these lines, and this is what I need to do. But if you haven't already done so, here are some top tips that you need to do over the next couple of weeks. If you haven't already done so, I strongly recommend that you create a system to track days that employees work and also days that employees are on furlough. So in other words, those non-working days. Because having a system in place will help you when it comes to making that claim. The time period within which to make these claims has been significantly reduced as the step changes have been introduced in the way that the furlough scheme and the government contributions are being decreased while we wind down the flexible furlough scheme. So the system that you create should determine the working arrangements that you are going to need. So you have a very clear picture in a devised system on who is working, what hours are to be paid, what hours are to be furloughed, and these need to be measured against what their normal working hours would have been prior to the 19th of March of this year. So again, it's about getting organised. It's about making sure that the information you are going to be basing your claims on, the information that you're going to be basing your organisational structure is going to be on accurate data. You are going to become a data controller over the next couple of weeks. This is going to be really important for you. So if you don't plan for these and you don't plan for anticipated changes in staffing levels, you're going to end up in chaos because that's not good for business practice. It's not good because you might miss an all-important increase in revenue, increase in production levels, but more importantly, if you are not organised as a business owner or as a team leader in your team that you're going to be leading to come out of the coronavirus and getting them back into work, you're not going to instill any confidence in getting your employees coming back into work. So the more organised you can be, the more your employees will feel empowered and encouraged to come back into work, the less likelihood you are going to have that resistance and the reluctance of employees coming back into work. Going into lockdown was probably relatively easy because we just shut shop and we went home. But coming out of lockdown is far more complicated and complex than I think anybody could have imagined, because it's not simply a case of let's open that shutters and it's business as usual, because it isn't. Proper planning and putting systems in place, processes in procedures will make coming back so much simpler and much less stressful. The next topic I'm going to talk about is, I know you're all going to be saying, Angela, we're waiting for this, but you should have a template letter and a flexible furlough agreement ready and waiting. Now, the reason why you need to have a template, and do bear with me because we are developing our template agreement and our furlough letter, and I'll give you a reason why we haven't got that out to you yet. And that's because we're waiting for clear guidance to come out from the government. Last week, I did tell you that we were expecting the guidance to come out on the 12th, which they did. But naively, I expected it to come out in one document. how wrong was I? Because the guidance came out as mere updates to approximately 8 or 9 different guidance notes. The government wasn't particularly helpful in pointing out what updates they had made. It was down to us to go through and read through it, but these were just guidance. The all-important document that I am waiting for, and it has been promised that it will be coming out, and I was really hopeful that we would have it today, is the Treasury Directive. So this is the document that has the teeth, that actually puts all the guidance into legislation. So once I've got that, and I can be absolutely sure that we understand the guidance, will I then be able to update the furlough agreement and the template letter. But I promise you, you will have it before the 1st of July, so that you can issue it to employees in good time, so that you can get them back into this flexible furlough scheme. So the reason why you need a template is because you will need to confirm the working days and the furlough days, and you will need to send that out to your employees. You will need to use the template to base it on your business needs. So as I've already alluded to, your business needs will change from week to week, and the letter will need to be adapted and updated to reflect the business requirements. As I said, I promise you, I will get that template out to you as soon as the Treasury has issued their directive, and as soon as we are able to do that, but you will have it before the 1st of July. So once you have this document, and once we have the Treasury Directive, we will be able to give you that flexible furlough agreement that will be concrete, and you'll be able to use it going forward. If you cast your mind back to when we were in the early stages of the flexible furlough agreement, you will remember that we were updating it on a regular basis because we kept getting those guidance, and it was only once we had that Treasury directive that we were able to crystallize that agreement, and we could use that one agreement going forward. And I don't really want to go into that flip-flopping, is this right, isn't it right? So rather than making and giving you something and then having to change it, I've decided to wait, and hopefully it'll be worth the wait. So that template is really important, because not only is it really important in terms of communicating to your employees what they are, when they are required to come into work, when they are going to get their normal pay, and when they are going to get furlough pay. You have to make sure that you have a retention system in place to ensure that all communications and records, agreements, documents are retained. There is a requirement that these documents are retained for 5 years, and this is under the original furlough agreement terms. I don't expect it to be changing under the flexible furlough scheme. So again, you'll need to make sure that you keep these records for 5 years. 5 years is a long time, so make sure that you have got a retention system in place that can accommodate and facilitate keeping those records confidential and in line with GDPR. So again, don't leave them lying around. You do still need to remember all these other important legislative pieces of legislation that is out there. And GDPR, do you remember GDPR? You need to make sure that any records are kept in line with GDPR retention. So if you are planning to make redundancies that are effective from the 31st of July, the last day that you will be able to commence that redundancy process for employees between 20 and 100 employees, that day will be the 1st of July. So again, when we were talking about those numbers earlier on, if you're making 20 or more employees redundant, and you're entering into that 30-day consultation period, 31st of July being the effective termination, where you're effecting that termination, your start of consultation needs to be the 1st of July. Of course, if you are proposing or contemplating making redundancies of 100 and more, you've already missed that date, because that date was the 16th of June. So again, you won't be able to tie it in with the 31st of July. You will then tip it over into August. So again, having those numbers, understanding those numbers, will then put the timetable in place for you. The 31st of July is the last date that you can claim, file your claims for furlough up to the 30th of June. So again, really important date, 31st of July, to claim claims to lodge your claims for claims up until the 30th of June. So we've talked about what you need to do in June. We are looking at what you need to be doing in July. This is always with having your staffing levels in the back of your mind. So throughout of July, you will need to start preparing your claims to put your claim in, and you've got to prepare claims based on a week's work. So you will need to collect that data to show what the usual working hours of that employee who was in work, what their furloughed hours are, and what their working hours are. Do remember that you may still have employees who are, whilst we are on the flexible scheme, they are still on furlough for their full normal working hours. Because this might be because they are still having to furlough, because they're under furlough because they are shielding. You may be exercising your right to keep them on the furlough because of childcare responsibilities. So there are a number of reasons why you might still have an employee completely furloughed rather than coming in on part-time work, part-time furloughed. So again, it's really important to understand who in your workplace is going to be affected by other factors that means that they may not be able to come into work on those part-time basis. So again, having the collecting that data, do remember that from the 1st of August, employers will no longer be able to claim for the employer national insurance contributions or and the auto enrollment contributions. That is in relation to both the working hours as well as the furloughed hours. So again, when I was talking about looking at whether you are going to be able to afford that, that is for both those furloughed hours and the working hours. So you need to make sure that you have a system in place that you can track that. And of course, make sure that you don't inadvertently make that claim for your national insurance contributions and your employer auto enrollment contributions in August, because you won't be able to claim for it. So from September, we know that there is going to be that further step change where the contribution rates from the government is going to decrease. So you will need to make sure that you update your tracking system to reflect that change. Employees will still receive 80% of their normal wages. It is capped at the £2,500, which means the government will contribute a maximum of £2,187.50 towards that £2,500 cap, which means your contribution will be a maximum of £312.50. Do remember that that is only in relation to the furloughed hours. In other words, the hours where the employee is not working. The employee will still receive their full normal remuneration in relation to their hours that they do work. So that if you start thinking about it, there is lots of splits in terms of what is worked, what is furloughed, what contribution goes to where, and it's making sure that you track that correctly and accurately. So again, just a reminder that in September, you can't claim those employer national insurance and auto enrollment contributions. So we now sort of move forward to looking at staffing levels in September. September, you should start thinking about what is going to happen when the furlough scheme comes to an end, because that end date is the 31st of October. The 1st of November, you will revert back to the normal position. You as an employer will have to pick up the entire wage bill. There will no longer be any financial support from the government under the scheme. So throughout September, you need to really start thinking about what will happen at the end. Are you going to have to make those changes to employment terms? Are they going to be permanent changes? Are those changes going to be a variation of terms where you are perhaps going to have to consult in relation to reduced working hours, reduced pay? The two don't necessarily go hand in hand. Of course, if you are going to be reducing the hours, one would assume that there would be a natural reduction of pay, because of course we're looking at cost basis here, but that doesn't necessarily mean if you are going to reduce pay that there is going to be a natural reduction of hours. But those two key elements will be a fundamental change to employment terms, and you will need to seek the employee's agreement to do that, because of course if you don't, you are exposing yourself to a potential claim for unfair dismissal. It will be constructive unfair dismissal, which will give rise to compensation that you don't need to pay if you follow a proper process. So it's really important to start thinking about what impact is not having the furlough scheme going to have on your business, your staffing levels, as well as your cost base. If you are going to be making redundancies, the last day to start that 45-day consultation period, and that 45-day consultation period relates to 100 or more employees at one establishment. That date in the diary is the 16th of September. So if you've got 100 or more employees that you are proposing or contemplating making redundant at the end of October, you need to start with that collective consultation by no later than the 16th of September. So again, we know that from the 1st of October, we are having the next step change in terms of the government contributions. It will be reduced again. You will need to make sure that you have a reminder to update your tracking system to reflect that change, so that when you come to make your claim to get your grant through the furlough scheme, you are making that claim on accurate data, and making sure that that data is correct will avoid any claims being rejected by HMRC, or HMRC coming knocking on your door at some point in the future saying you've made an overclaimant. I did actually read in the news that there are some big organisations that are actually suggesting and proposing that they are going to be paying back some of the grants that they have already claimed. Now, of course, those are these huge multi-billion-pound organisations who are able to do that, which you know, is really good. But you know, SMEs, you know, we are relying on those grants. So don't mess it up by making a claim for something where it could have been avoided, because the last thing you want to do is have HMRC knocking on your door, wanting to perhaps carry out an audit and find that you've made a wrong claim, because it may sort of raise a red flag, and they might investigate other claims that you've made. So making sure that you have that tracking system in place is really, really important, but it's really good because it'll make it so much simpler and easier for you. So again, when we're looking at October, as I mentioned, we have that step change. The employees will still receive 80% of their wages, which is capped up to that £2,500, but the maximum contribution that the government will pay is £1,875, which means your contribution will increase to £625. Do remember that that is only in relation to the furloughed hours. So again, if you have employees working part-time furloughed, you will still need to pay their normal hours for the hours that they have actually worked. And of course, you will no longer be able to claim for those national insurance contributions and the auto-enrollment contributions. The 1st of October is the last day where you can commence the 30-day consultation. So the 30-day consultation applies to situations where you are proposing or contemplating making 20 or more employees redundant at one establishment. You know, in terms of individual consultation, there are no prescribed timeframes, but it is important that you start consulting in good time when you are dealing with redundancies of 20 or less employees at one establishment. So I've gone through a lot of dates, and there's lots of changes taking effect over the next 12 weeks or so. And it's really important that you get things right. It's really important to have a handle on those staffing levels from an operational point of view. You need to have a handle on the staffing levels for making your claim. So again, you also need to have a handle on those staffing levels in relation to whether you need to make any of those permanent changes, always bearing in mind those key dates in terms of consultation. So let's have a look at the next area of my seminar today, where I'm going webinar, where I'm going to be carrying on today. I can see those questions coming in. It is great that those questions are coming in. I'm going to try and get to them as quickly as I can. So do bear with me while I go through these next few stages. So let's have a look at options that you have for returning staff to work. So before you even think about returning staff into the workplace, you must make sure that you have a safe working environment for staff to return to. And you've got to make sure that it complies with the health and safety measures to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus. We had a fantastic webinar last week where we talked about health and safety and reluctant employees, getting them back into work, but you need to make sure that you do implement the social distancing measures that are in place. So the question that I will always ask, and it always comes out in your pack, is the COVID-19 risk assessment. I did do a standalone webinar on how to complete that risk assessment. We will send that out. It is available on our YouTube channel. So, if you haven't done that risk assessment and you looked at it and you think, oh gosh, this is too complicated, I don't know where to start, do have a look at that webinar. Do listen. Hopefully it will take you through it. But that important thing is making sure that you get that COVID-19 return to work risk assessment in place, because that is a really invaluable tool to help you with the addressing reluctant workers, and also addressing the measures that you need to put in place. Again, it will help you with managing those staffing levels as we move out of lockdown. So the key thing is to identify who can actually return to work. So you will remember that perhaps early on, some individuals may still be required to shield. We know that new guidance is coming out on lifting the shielding restrictions, but you may still have employees who have just come out of shielding, or who are perhaps still required to shield. But you do still need to be sympathetic and understanding to those who have been, perhaps in a really more restricted lockdown than what perhaps others have been. So be mindful on the reasons why they had to shield. You may have employees who are not able to return to work because of childcare responsibilities. There is still a lot of uncertainty about when schools will be going back. And I think there is a large proportion of employees that will have childcare issues, particularly when both partners in the household are returning to work, and they are having to manage that between the pair of them. So again, be mindful of that, and be understanding, but also you've got a business to run. So it's trying to find that balance in supporting staff, but also getting your business up and running where it needs to be. And there may still be employees who are reluctant or still refusing to return to work for other reasons. And the key thing is, is making sure that anybody you have on furlough are on furlough for the right reasons. And it is still, and it always has been, your decision whether to furlough staff or not. And sometimes it might come across as unfair if that financial resource and support is still there. But of course, as we start going into these various step change where the contribution from the government is easing, you are going to have to make some tough decisions and saying, I can't afford it. And I think being open and honest with employees about the affordability of keeping them on the furlough scheme, including your contribution, will go a long way in helping them understand the true realities of the situation. I would always urge employees to take socially responsible decisions. Listen carefully to what employees have to say, listen to the concerns that they have raised, and work hard towards working with the employees to finding a pragmatic way to arrange the working arrangements going forward, but still having in the forefront what is essential for your business to make sure that your business can start picking up, because that's the essential thing about everything, is we are only going to be able to get the economy going if we start getting our businesses up and running. So those who can return to work, obviously, you know, it goes without saying, they should be actively encouraged to do so, and businesses should be actively getting their businesses up and running to kickstart that economy. I'm going to say one word: plan, plan, and plan some more, because taking a step back and visualizing what your business is going to require, you will be in a much better and much stronger place if you can visualize it in your mind what your requirements are going to be, because that way you can have a look at it from a bird's eye view, what measures you need to, physical changes you need to do, but what staffing requirements will be needed to support that. So plan, plan, and plan again. Think about start and finish times, minimize how many people are going to be in one space at a time. I'm not going to go over all things that I have talked about in previous webinars, but again, there are some practical things that you can have a look at options that you will need to think about when thinking about returning staff to work. So a couple of them: start and finish times, phase them in and out. It might mean that you need to change breaks during, you know, rest breaks during the working hour, during the pattern. If you have got prescribed breaks or specific times when breaks are going to be taken, you might want to adjust those slightly. Do check the contracts of employment, because what you don't want to do is inadvertently make a change where it is a change, a fundamental change to an employment contract. You don't want to be dealing with grievances where people feel aggrieved that you have made changes without, you know, their agreement. You know, a key thing about all of this is communication. Speak to your employees, explain to them the changes that you are proposing. Make sure that they are aware of what of what changes you are proposing, what why you are changing it, and the key thing is to make sure that you can minimize the spread and contain the risk of that transmission of the coronavirus. Again, something that some employers will completely miss, and again, it's something to think about when you're looking at staffing levels and making those changes. Have a look at rest breaks. Are they paid or are they unpaid? Make sure that you don't inadvertently breach contractual terms by making changes that's going to have an impact. So again, as I've said before, communicating to employees in advance of what those changes are is absolutely key to making this transition a lot easier, a lot simpler, and a lot less stressful for you. Because if you get it wrong, you don't communicate, you're going to have those grievances, and to be quite frank, you've got enough on your plate without having to deal with those. So let's try and alleviate those. Let's try and alleviate issues that will naturally give rise to disgruntled employees by communicating. Let's get that information out there to them. Again, looking at how meetings are conducted. These are not necessarily external meetings that we're talking about. I'm talking about internal meetings. It might be team meetings. It might actually be more specific to disciplinary or grievance meetings where you need to have these. And these type of meetings simply can't be avoided. So again, have a think about how you are going to, you know, be managing that when you are looking at staffing levels, when you are looking at, you know, that return in, you know, returning staff into work. Always bear in mind making sure that you have those socially distancing rules, you know, in place. As I mentioned earlier, what happens to pay when furlough ends? You end up back at the default position. So do have that end date, 31st of October, you know, in the back of your mind, to make sure that you coincide and make sure that everything, you know, comes together at the right time, and that comes from planning. And do remember that you will need to consult in good time with any measures and changes that you are going to be implementing. So really, really important. So let's, as we start getting to the last sort of session, section that I'm going to be covering in this webinar, before we go to that all-important questions that I can see are building up, you know, so let's have a look at conducting redundancies safely and cost-effectively, which is going to be the key to your success. Going through a redundancy process is stressful, and you have to do it by following the letter of the law. Because if you don't, it could lead to expensive penalties. I've already touched on the protective awards, but if you get it wrong and you're if you find yourself in a tribunal in an unfair dismissal claim, it could cost you unnecessary compensation in having to pay someone for being unfairly dismissed. So through consultation with all those risks, continue to looking at alternative options to redundancies are essential steps that you have to take going through that process. Redundancy always gives rise to some tricky questions, and quite often those tricky questions come about are whether it's possible to make somebody redundant who is on maternity leave. Is it okay to recruit after you've had a redundancy situation? When can you start that recruitment? So there's lots of tricky and sticky questions that do pop up going through a redundancy situation. So again, before you start a redundancy, you must make sure that you have had a look at every conceivable alternative and make sure that there is absolutely no alternative other than to make redundancies. Redundancies should be an absolute last resort and shouldn't be the first port of call. So you should be having a look at what you can do to try and prevent that. So some options that you should be having a look at to prevent that is a recruitment freeze. If you have perhaps offered a job to somebody, you may want to consider withdrawing that job offer. There are a couple of things that you need to have a look at that in terms of notice. But in most cases, withdrawing a job offer is going to be have no financial impact on you, but it may have an impact, so do just get some advice. But that's a good way of preventing, you know, having a measure that you can avoid having to make that redundancy. You may want to implement short-term working or layoff. Again, you must make sure that you have the contractual right to do that. Voluntary redundancy, again, is a good way to avoid those compulsory redundancies. You want to have a look at perhaps reduced hours and pay. These may be a permanent variation of terms. You will have to consult to get that. You'll also have to be mindful that you don't go below the national minimum wage. So that is if you are going to be, you know, reducing the pay, but still expecting employees to work the normal hours that they were working. So again, you will need to be mindful of national minimum wage. You might want to consider salary deferrals, not deferrals. So you're going to defer the payment of making salaries. Again, you want to make sure that that is structured in a way that you don't fall below the national minimum wage, but you also want to make sure that it's structured in a way that if an employee resigns during the period where the salary has been deferred, that they forfeit that. So again, you want to have a look at how that's going to be done. But salary deferrals, again, is a good way of reducing those cost base without having to make redundancies. Of course, there's sabbaticals, and of course there is the furlough scheme, but we know the furlough scheme is coming to an end at the end of October. So you'll need to make sure that there is no other way to solve the issue before you start commencing that potential redundancy. So normally redundancies come about, potential redundancies come about because you are having to look at perhaps cost base, you know, economy, or it is because of there just isn't the work that's going to be required to be done. So research shows that once you, and I'm not talking about general research, I'm talking about when you are doing research within your own organization, when you are looking and you are faced at potential redundancy situations, you will need to understand what sort of measures you have in place, what measures you need to put in place, and whether there is actually going to be a redundancy situation. If you are faced with a redundancy situation, you have to carry out the process fairly and reasonably. And the key thing is, as a real starting point, is you must have a business justification for carrying out that redundancy. A redundancy situation is very specific and it is defined in the Employment Rights Act. If you don't satisfy that redundancy definition and you go down and you make someone, you terminate someone's employment on the ground of redundancy and you haven't satisfied that redundancy definition, you are exposing your organisation to having to pay out unnecessary costs, because you would have gone down the redundancy route thinking, I have to pay statutory redundancy pay. But if you find yourself in an employment tribunal and the tribunal judge finds that the real reason for dismissal was not redundancy, you could then end up facing compensation for an unfair dismissal. So it could be a double whammy if you get it wrong, in having to pay compensation where it really could have been avoided. So you have to be really, really clear about the reasons why you need to make a role redundant. And this will help you in communicating that to your employees. Of course, you've got to remember that in a redundancy situation, it is the role that is made redundant before the individual themselves are made redundant. And you only get to making the employee redundant once you have gone through due and proper process. And of course, if they are made redundant as a result of going through due and proper process, the principal reason, the main reason why they are made redundant is on the grounds of redundancy. So situations from experience where redundancies arise is normally out of cost savings and restructure. You know, cost savings are arising out of fluctuation in the markets, financial impacts, cash flow. You're always looking at ways of reducing headcount, and of course, employees will say, are your most valuable asset. They are the most expensive asset in most cases. So again, these are situations which COVID-19 has triggered. So again, you know, looking at that, you know, will in most cases trigger a redundancy situation. So talking about redundancy as a process is easy enough to talk about. I think we can all talk about going through a process. You know, it is clearly defined that there are set stages that we need to go through. And like most things, it could be seen as a tick box exercise, and it could sound pretty basic. But when you start looking at the detail and you start digging deeper, which you always should do, suddenly redundancy is anything other than basic and anything other than simple. And before you know where you are, it is complicated. So there's a couple of hot spots where you need to focus on in terms of redundancy, and I'm going to break that down into sort of 6 key stages. So the first stage is the definition of a redundancy. Is there a genuine redundancy situation? As I already mentioned, it is defined in the Employment Rights Act as to what that redundancy situation looks like. So you've got to make sure that there is a genuine redundancy situation. If you don't satisfy that redundancy definition, just stop where you are, because you may have the perfect process in place. If you get stage 1 wrong, you will get the entire process wrong, and it will be a waste of time, effort going through the whole process, only to find that when you get to the end, it's wrong and it's unfair. So definition of redundancy, is it a genuine redundancy situation? If it is a genuine redundancy situation, the next step that you need to have a look at is identifying that pool. So the pool, the selection pool is who is going to go into that pot of roles that are at risk of redundancy. Again, getting that pool correct is incredibly important, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The next section where you need to make sure you are right is that selection criteria. So the selection criteria is how are you going to decide who is going to go if you have to make that decision. And again, there are so many pitfalls in that selection criteria, and the one that comes out 9 times out of 10 is discrimination. Discrimination lurks in the selection criteria where you least expect it. So it's always, you know, a top tip in being mindful of discrimination when you're going through that selection process. Consulting. So there is an obligation to consult with your employees when you are going through a redundancy situation. Now, going through the consultancy process is divided into 3 key areas, and making sure that you get that right is essentially important, because it goes back down to that number, that number 20. So again, consultation is where there are less than 20 employees. There is a prescribed process that you need to go through. Whilst there isn't a time frame, you do still need to engage with the individuals during consultation. Where there are 20 or more employees, again, where there's 20 or more employees at one establishment, you have to make sure that you, because that will trigger the collective consultation. And again, breaking collective consultation down gives you additional obligations that you have to comply with. So consultation during redundancy is another very key area where it can go so wrong very quickly if you're not careful right at the outset and making sure that you get it right. So the next sort of key stage that you need to go through is considering alternative employment. Alternative employment needs to be considered right from the beginning, right the way through, right up until the date of dismissal. It is an ongoing obligation to consider alternative employment. And at the moment, that includes using the furlough scheme. But of course, that's only available until the 31st of October. And then it is the final point of that actual dismissal, and how that is communicated out to the employee is important, because again, there are certain requirements that you have to provide to an employee about that dismissal, what their rights are and what the next steps are. Getting it wrong could cost you. So without laboring the point too much, get it right from the very start. You may have a perfectly executed process, but if you don't have a genuine redundancy situation, it will be a futile exercise. It will not matter how fair and how reasonable you've been throughout the process. It will be an unfair dismissal, because the principal reason for the dismissal will not be redundancy. It will be something else, and it may well be some other substantial reason. If you get the selection pool wrong, again, it could give rise to unnecessary stress and anxiety within the workforce. If you make the selection pool too wide, it requires a lot of effort and contemplation to redundancy, making it quite onerous. Equally, if the pool is too narrow, it completely defeats the object. So again, you know, getting that selection pool right at the beginning is really important. If you don't consider the selection pool correctly, you know, you could be getting the number of proposed or contemplated redundancies wrong, again, which might give rise to a protective award. You might get it wrong in terms of having to consult with a trade union or employee reps. So again, there are factors that you need to bear in mind when you are looking at that selection pool. You can't try and circumvent getting around redundancies by thinking, oh, I'll make some redundant now and I'll make the others redundant later, because you can't. There are measures in place to be able to identify where you are trying to cut corners. My advice would be, simply don't do it. Do it properly, get the support and guidance that you need, and you will come out of it successfully. So again, looking at the selection criteria, this is assuming that you have to decide who is going to stay and who is going to go. And it's during the selection criteria stage where it is filled with a myriad of pitfalls in relation to discrimination. And it's not necessarily what you are doing, because you have, put this process together. It's about the individuals who are going through that process. So you may ask line managers to carry out the scoring process. They may inadvertently discriminate against, a particular employee, which will make everything unfair. So again, you've got to make sure that when you are deciding the criteria that you're going to apply, you also need to make sure that the way it is applied objectively. And this, as I say, is often where discrimination lurks, where you least expect it. Fairness and reasonableness is, I want to say, a given from the beginning to end. If you've listened to or you've been part of my paid for redundancy webinar, I cover this in great detail on how you can ensure that being fair and reasonable throughout the redundancy situation can go a very long way in making sure that that outcome is fair and reasonable, because all it takes is making one decision, an incorrect decision, which will making a decision unfairly or unreasonably in a nanosecond could unravel your entire process. So again, fairness and reasonableness, as I said, I cover it in great detail in the paid for redundancy webinar. It's so important, because you have to be at your A game throughout the whole process, because the slightest slip up could cost you dearly. So when considering redundancies, as I've already mentioned, we have our paid for webinar, which has been well received and well attended. And I would strongly encourage you, if you are thinking about going through redundancies and you're thinking, I do need that little bit of help, I would recommend that you invest in yourself and you invest in your business in taking up the offer of the paid for webinar. If you decide that you're going to need more help, we will offset the costs that you have invested in the webinar against our coronavirus package. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the difference? Well, with our coronavirus package, we are there to help you. We become your virtual HR. We are there to support you with that one-to-one support. We will go through making sure that you get that definition of redundancy right. Is it a genuine redundancy situation, or is it perhaps a restructure which may not result in a redundancy situation because the work of a particular kind is just being distributed and being carried out elsewhere? Does that necessarily mean that the role that is no longer there, is that a redundancy situation, or is the termination for some other substantial reason? So again, it's making sure that we are there to help and support you to make sure that you make that there is a genuine redundancy situation. And if there isn't, we will talk you through other alternatives and take you through that process. We will help you identify that selection pool. We will go through your organizational chart, department by department, role by role, to identify that selection pool. We will then help you devise the selection criteria. We will make sure that it is fit for purpose for your particular organization, making sure that you don't inadvertently fall into any of those pitfalls where discrimination will lurk. We will provide you with that support, that expert support and guidance throughout the entire process from beginning to end, including helping you draft those communications to effectively communicate to your employees what you are doing, how you are going to do it, and what the next steps are going to be, because that communication is so important. We will make sure, of course, that we keep you on the right side of the correct legal process, no matter what we end up doing as part of that support. We want to share your passion in making sure that your business comes through the restructure, the redundancy, whatever formal process that you need to make sure that you are on the right side of the law. So if you think that the coronavirus crisis package is something that you think you may need, give me a call. Let's have a conversation. Let's make sure that it is the right thing for you. It is the right thing for your business. We will tailor make the package specific to your business needs, and that includes our costs. It's not a one size fits all. This is really truly tailor-made to what you need at this particular time, making sure you come out of this correctly and limiting any financial costs and exposure to you. So that's bringing me to the end of my webinar. I have gone over the hour in terms of sharing what you should be doing and how you should be dealing with things. I am going to spend the next 10 minutes going through the all-important questions, because I do think that that is important. And I thank you for staying on, on this webinar and getting through to the end. So if you bear with me, Imogen, I'm going to start with you. You were the first in the box, so apologise for keeping you waiting in getting this answer. Do remember that we do collate all these questions. You will get the full questions and answers by everybody packaged up for you together with a recording of this webinar. It will come out to you during the course of next week, but let's get through as many of these questions as we can. So Imogen has asked, oh, let me just make this a little bit bigger so I can get there. So if we do a flexible working agreement and then wish to change it, do we have to do a subsequent flexible working agreement each time? Do we need employees to sign the agreement? Now that's a very good question, Imogen, and this is one of the things that we understand from the guidance, and this is why I'm waiting for that all-important Treasury directive to make sure that that is our understanding. As we understand it at the moment, yes, every time there is going to be a change in the flexible part-time working, you will need to issue a new agreement, which is why during my webinar I talked about a template, which is why we want to make sure that we're going to get a template that's going to be workable for you. So when you're looking at your working requirements, you might think, well, I'm not really sure. It is based on a week-by-week basis, but you might get to week 2 and think, actually, this is working for me, and you will be able to use the same agreement time and time again. Whether you need to get the employee to actually physically sign the agreement, again, a very good question. If you remember when we first went into lockdown and we first started using the furlough agreement, all we needed is to notify the employee in writing. There was no requirement to get a physical signed agreement back from the employee. We are waiting for the directive to come out, and I'm hoping that that will be clearer on that. But what I will do, and I promise as soon as we've got that, I will send out a communication picking up on these particular points. So Imogen, I think I've half answered those questions for you. We are waiting for those guidance, and whatever I've said today is dependent on those guidance. So a big red and white flag there, a health warning, everything that I've said in here is dependent on those guidance, on that directive coming out. So I hope that answers your question. Imogen has provided another question. I'm just going to see if I can stretch this out a little bit. Bear with me one moment while I just try and get this a bit bigger. So if we have fixed term employees who are on furlough, they are actually placements who finish in June and we pay their holidays not used. Do we pay the full 100% of the furlough, or can we furlough? So Imogen, sorry, I'm not sure I understand this question, so apologies. I think I'm going to need to take that one away. So I think what I think you are asking, and I apologize if I've misunderstood this, is you have some placements who were on a fixed term contract and their contract was due to come to an end at the end of June. And the question I think you are asking, do you pay holidays out if they have not used them? The answer to that is yes, because they would have accrued that holiday entitlement. Do you have to pay the full 100%? Yes, you do. So holiday entitlement gets topped up to the 100% to their normal remuneration. And can the furlough scheme cover the 80%? Absolutely. So you can use the furlough scheme to pay them the holiday so that it limits your cost in terms of that financial outlay to them. It will be that top up, but yes, you can use the scheme to for holiday purposes. So I do hope that answers your questions, and I apologize if it took me a little while to get there. So Barrett has asked a good question. How do I go about getting my staff back to work, but on limited hours until we get back onto our feet? Are they on furlough? They are on furlough at the time, and if staff are not happy with the hours, what can we do? Particularly, and it looks like the employee is employed for less than 2 years. So again, some really good questions in there. So let's break that down to a couple of the questions. So how do you go about getting your staff back on limited hours? So the first starting point is you will need to communicate that to your team. Once we've got the template letter you can use to say we are going to be getting you back into work, we're going to be putting you on part-time hours, which means the hours that you work, you will get paid your normal remuneration, but the furlough hours, you will get 80% of your wages for those furloughed hours. So it's about getting that communication out to explain to them what you are going to be doing, and then of course it's getting that agreement in place, which actually sets out the exact days and hours that you are going to require them to work. So as an example, you might be saying, employee A, I require you to come in for 3 hours on a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday. Employee B, I'm going to require you to come in for part-time hours on a Tuesday and a Thursday. You will set out what their normal contractual hours are. So if they normally work a 5-day week, 40 hours, you will have it as 40 hours per week, and you will break down how many hours on the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday they're going to work, and you will set out what their furlough hours are going to be. So again, it's about breaking down which hours are going to be paid for and which hours are going to be the furloughed hours. If they are not happy with that, again, it's about talking to them, it's about working collaboratively with them, it's about understanding why they don't agree with those hours. So it may well be that the hours that you are asking them to come back on, perhaps they've got childcare issues, and they are going to have to fit in with another member in their household in terms of covering that childcare. So again, it's about adopting a pragmatic approach in talking to your employees, listening to their concerns, and coming to a pragmatic working arrangement that's going to be suitable to both you and to them. If the employee flatly refuses and is just being, unhelpful in trying to find a solution, of course, if an employee has less than 2 years service, you might want to consider carrying out a short service dismissal. I would advise being very careful if you're going to be carrying out a short service dismissal. Whilst it is permissible, you need to be careful and mindful about them potentially tipping over that 2-year period. So again, looking at their length of service will be absolutely key in making that decision. And also just bringing you back and reminding you about the potential discrimination pitfall that you might find yourself in. So again, be careful that even though you can carry out a short service dismissal, understand the reasons why the employee can't come back into work, because you may inadvertently be exposing yourself either to a direct or an indirect discrimination claim. So again, it's about communication, speaking to your employees, understanding the reasons for resistance. So Bharat, I hope that answers your question. So we've got Paul. Paul has another question for me. We are looking to bring some staff back part-time in the 1st of July, but one of our consultants said that they can only do 2 days per week because of childcare issues. They are a prime earner in the household, but only wants to work 2 days a week and his wife works 3 days per week. We would like them to come into the office at least 3 days per week, moving them onto 5 days at the end of July, depending on the position at the work and the sales. So again, I think I'm just double checking. Oh, that question goes on a lot longer. Is because you believe that sales cannot be done at home, especially while looking after children, and to deal with the issue. And that's, I think, is the end of the question. So again, I think I've covered a couple of those. This particular individual has already identified that they're having to share their childcare responsibilities with somebody else in the household. So I think it's about having those open and honest communications. Do bear in mind that that particular individual will perhaps be feeling already quite anxious, because you are already starting to indicate that you are going to start ramping it up. I absolutely understand that the predicament you find yourself in is absolutely carrying out a sales call while you're at home and you have childcare responsibilities is perhaps not the right environment to it. So again, I think it's about trying to find a solution, but if that is not possible, then I would suggest that you come and speak to me. Let's try and find a way that we can find a solution for your business, so that we don't inadvertently put you in a difficult situation where you are faced with a difficult decision about that particular individual, because it may well be that you might need to have a difficult conversation with them. So Paul, if you want to think about that and come back to me, I'd be more than happy to help you on a one-to-one on that one. So again, Imogen, I think this is a different Imogen. I have a question here, is what if we plan 18 redundancies and later down the line we do 3 or 4 more? That is a fantastic question. So when you are looking at the numbers for redundancies, it is really important to make sure that you at the moment you are thinking of potential or proposed, and the legislation actually, you know, the wording in the legislation actually talks about the words proposed or contemplated. If you are proposing and contemplating more than that 20, you will have to go into collective consultation, even if it means at a later stage you have less. Once you have started the collective consultation process or the individual process, and you discover that you do have more, it may mean that you have to start the process again. This is why it is absolutely essential to do your groundwork, to do your planning, to do your contemplating really, really early on. If you think you're going to have to make more than what you are you're proposing at the beginning, it may be considered as an attempt to circumvent making collective consultation processes in place, which will give rise to that protective award. So if you plan 18 redundancies and you end up making a few more, be very, very careful, because you may fall foul of that collective consultation. Again, Imogen, if this is something that you are proposing, I'd strongly advise that you have a look at it in a little more detail. It is far better to have more people, and I know I talked about having a too wide a pool. It's breaking it down and making sure that you are very clear in every process that you are going, starting very, very early on, is looking at that selection pool. Who is at risk of being made redundant, so that you don't find yourself in that situation further down the line where you actually need to make more. So again, I'd strongly advise that you seek further advice and guidance in relation to that. So Posh, I have a question from you, is what will happen if employees refuse to come to work as he is self-isolation and husband and her household has COVID positive? Okay, so this is something really, really completely different to your choice. So if there is positive case of COVID-19 in an employee's household, they have to self-isolate for 14 days, regardless of whether they have got COVID-19 themselves or not. or even if they are symptomatic. For an individual who is in a household who has positive COVID-19, they will be entitled to statutory sick pay. So again, it's specific COVID-19 statutory sick pay, which you'll be able to claim back through the statutory sick pay portal. So again, that's you should not be having them coming into work. So I would be advising against encouraging them to come back. Statutory sick pay, and you as an employer can claim that back through the government. So Posh, I hope that answers your question. I'm conscious that we're coming to 20 past. There are loads and loads of questions. I'm going to answer 2 more if that is okay, and the rest I promise I will pull together into a Q&A, and that will come out to you. I thank everybody who's remained on here, and I'm really sorry if I haven't come to your question, but I promise you, you will get an answer to it. So Vipin, we have a question from you. Can staff be part furloughed from July, so they are working 5 days and they come in for 3 days and 2 days taken off as furlough? Absolutely. So this is the prime example on how the flexible furlough scheme is going to be working. They normally work 5 days a week. You require them to come in for 3 days. They're going to remain on furlough for 2 days. And you will be able to claim through the coronavirus job retention scheme for those 2 days where they are furloughed. Again, how you, whether it's full days or whether it's reduced days, it will always be compared against what their normal working hours were prior to 19th of March of this year. So Vipin, I hope that answers your question. And the last question for today, before we all turn into a pumpkin, is if a member of staff is taken ill whilst on furlough, are they now on sick pay, or can we claim through furlough? The sick will be long-term as they require treatment and has been classed as vulnerable. The earliest they can return is early part of 2021. If their position is redundant, can they be made redundant? Helen, that is a very complicated and complex question. I'd be very interested to understand the reason why they are on long-term sick. By the sounds of it, I'm not sure whether the reason why they are going to be on long-term sick is because of COVID-19 or if it is because of something else. And rather than going down different rabbit holes on what this might be, I'm going to take your question offline and I will come back to you with an answer for you. So everybody else, I'm really sorry. I've taken up far more time than there is. As I have mentioned, I promise I will collate all these remaining questions. There's some fantastic questions in there. In fact, the questions go on that it's off my page. So that will just give you an indication on how engaged you have been today. And I thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today. We are in troubling times. Do go to our website, www.hrforuk.com. Do get in touch through the contact us page or through our email. Contact us, just fill out the form and we'll be in touch. If you want to email us, it's info@hrforuk.com or give us a call on 01455 444 222. We are in this together. There is help there for you. Do get in touch. And before everybody else turns into a pumpkin with me, thank you very much today and have a fantastic weekend. And I'll see you next Friday, same place, same time for our Friday webinar. Thank you, everybody, and have a good weekend. Bye for now.